At least we'll have another lecture in about a month's time, mid-December. It will be given by the famous Sean Hogan. And but tonight belongs to the famous John Connors, and I'm delighted to welcome John. John has eked out great fame for himself as a lecturer on the local and national circuit. He has penned a couple of wonderful books. He's also in the process of doing a book on the great Dan Breed. So without further ado, local man, local topics, I hand you over to John Connors. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Michael. Some of course also raise a number of articles for the local papers on and off. Sometimes don't always meet with widespread approval, but I think any fairness here tonight will be friendly fire. So, you know, Glasnevin Cemetery, it was opened in 1832, and it was an initiative by the great liberator himself, Daniel O'Connor. And it began an incident that happened in Camden Road. It's not there anymore. It's in the graveyard in Camden Road in Dublin. And a Catholic had been buried in the graveyard. And the sexton of the graveyard, he objected to whatever prayers the priest was saying. You see, as a result of the penal laws, Catholics were buried in Protestant graveyards. So that was 1824. So 1832, after Catholic emancipation in 1829, Daniel O'Connor, he initiated that. It began with 9 acres. And if you feel like walking it on, you won't be walking with me because I've walked it twice already searching for these 6 characters. 125 acres, I believe. So you'll be pretty well wore out. If you don't meet your headstone at the first go, you're going to be there quite a while. To find those 6 headstones, even with the help of the people there, the maps and everything, we actually had to pay 2 visits. So a man called Michael Carey was the first man to be buried there. Just any addition. It didn't miss a useless information, you know. It makes me feel good, you know, when I know something that perhaps nobody else knows on tonight, you know. But tonight, anyway, it's about people from our own parish from Borrisoleigh. Maybe not so much from our own parish, but people connected with the parish. Some of them are from the parish, more of them have connections with it. And these people contributed, I suppose, some way to significant events. And in our own lifetime, like we've seen maybe occasions that the national press found their way down to Borrisoleigh, generally to be maybe, you know, if something was controversial or something like that. But these people, at some stage in history, they had their place in the national headlines. And we'll go through some of these. So the first man is Francis Gleeson. And Francis Gleeson would be, I suppose, the direst saint of the trenches. He was born Main Street in Templemore, I believe around Murphy's, where Murphy's pub is there. The family moved out, what's the name of the place?
Barnan's.
No, out Clamore Road.
Oh,
yeah, they live up a lane there. I think the family are still there.
Really? Eastwood?
Yes.
Eastwood?
Yeah. So, Father Gleeson kind of coming with many minutes time. He joined the priesthood. He studied in Glasnevin College, and he was ordained in Maynooth. And his first ministry was in a school for the deaf in Dublin, the chaplain to a school for the deaf. And in 1914, with the escalation of the First World War, after the retreat of Mons, he volunteered to go with the Royal Munster Fusiliers to France, and it was there he distinguished himself. So you see the picture, the famous picture there, and that picture was commissioned by, if you look, Father Gleeson's on the horse, and on the other horses is Rickard is his name. I can't recall his first name now. He was the officer in charge. And he gave the battalion, the Fusiliers, the general absolution before the battle. And there was 800 men gathered for that. And when they reconvened after the battle, there was 3 officers and 200 men. So you're talking about huge losses. The painting was commissioned by Ricard's wife, Jessie, and Mataniani was an Italian artist who specialised in theatres of war painting. He was the man who done the painting. That incident took place at Rue de Bois, and it was, Ricard thought it was a roadside shrine, but it wasn't actually a roadside shrine. It was all that was left of a church that had been devastated with artillery fire. He died in June 1959, and he was parish priest on Mead Street in Dublin. And if you ever go to Mead Street Church in Dublin, there's a lovely little secluded garden after that there is, where people, you know, it's a real inner city it is, and the local people there, they gather there, and they sit down and rest and relax. And there's a lovely little grotto there that was done by Father Gleason. So that's there, you know, to his testament to this day. His papers are lodged in UCD in Dublin, and they make for very interesting reading. And he was given a notebook by his superiors, and he wrote lovely little fragments of information in that. And some of these, one in particular, he was not one bit enthralled by war propaganda, and even though he served a year in France and he volunteered after a break to serve a second spell, he was completely anti-war. And he wrote a bit of this in his diary, and he said, it was after the counterattack at the Battle of Givenchy, and he wrote critically about the people in Britain who were supporting the war, promoting the war. And he said, if advocates of war were meant to be soaked and caked and crusted with cold, wet trench mud, like these poor soldiers, to wear those mud-weighted coats, they would not be so glib with their treatise on the art of war. These militants should be meant to undergo a few nights in cheerless billets and mud river trenches to teach them a lesson. What is it all for at all? So it is, you can see from the list of battles. You know, it was at Aubrey Rue de Bois. That's where the painting was depicted. But like Lou Messia, I think the second battle of Ypres was the first place where gas was used in warfare. Passchendaele. You know, these are places, you know, that store horrific memories. Also in his papers, there's a copy of, he conducted retreats on the battlefield. And maybe you can see the 3 things that he encouraged there, you know, was temperance habits, what else is it? To avoid all occasions of sin and something else. So he went around to the trenches, to the battlefields, and he gave these retreats. So, you know, an amazing man. So he was Templemore, he was. So what are we talking about with Borrisoleigh for? That's the question. So his mother was Williams, and Williams was from Coolatown, where Brian's lived and Brian's later lived. He was a county engineer for quite some time, and he was a builder mostly of churches, and he built a church in Borrisoleigh, and he built a church in Templederry, and also the church in Maroon. The story with the church in Templederry and the church in Borrisoleigh, apparently Templederry has side eyes, Borrisoleigh hasn't. And apparently we're told that if you were to pick up the church in Templederry to fit neatly inside the church in Borrisoleigh, and the rumour pervaded, as well as building the church in Borrisoleigh, he built his own house. So the side ends of the church in Borrisoleigh are all before the tavern, they're on the right hand side. The stained glass window in the church, in the sanctuary of the church, he donated that, he commissioned that, it's dedicated to his parents, Thomas and Elizabeth Williams. The church in Maroe, he was doing pretty well, he was a respected builder of churches, and for those who are involved in construction, and all the struggles that go with it, if you ever happen to get a commission, we say, from a religious order or a convent or a diocese or whatever, you're more or less free flowing through life. But his job in Maroe went against him, because after building the church in Borrisoleigh, when he went down to 6 inches, he met the limestone. He had solid foundations. But when he got to Maroe, he had to go down over 20 foot because it was built on sand, and it actually broke him. And if you went through the newspaper archives, it said the early 1900s, there was quite a number of distressed auctions. His property was seized, and they made for pretty real. It was a pretty difficult fall from grace, really. He had a sister married to Glasnevin. He had another sister married to a man in Ballycahill, and another sister married to Ryan of Coolatagal. Ryan's across the road from there. There was locally, of course, we're kind of well. I suppose a bit like maybe if a hurler of moderate ability kind of finds his way into a parish, like we won't be too long about clearing it, So if there's anything about maybe somebody to be a fame or anything like that, when I was a young lad, the rumour persisted about Dalton Williams, the famous young Islander. Dalton Williams, he was raised in Grannistown House. He was an illegitimate child of Bridget Mary Williams, and that was the rumour that persisted. And, there's a verse there, like from the famous poem that he wrote, the dying girl, consumption has no pity, and blue eyes of golden hair. He was arrested with Kevin Doherty, and they were tried for treason because of stuff that they wrote in the Nationalist. And they were Williams was acquitted. Doherty was convicted and transported to Australia. And to avoid further persecution, Williams emigrated to America. And first of all, he settled in Mobile in Alabama. And from there he went to Louisiana. There he died. He had 4 children when he died in Mobile. During the American Civil War, a group of Irish soldiers from the New Hampshire regiment, they came upon his grave, and it was marked by a wooden cross with a little inscription on it, and they commissioned the headstone. And the dying girl that he spoke about, or that he wrote about in the poem, apparently there's a girl called Mary Feely, who was buried in Glasnevin Cemetery. So, for tonight, we claim her as our own anyway, we will. Michael Droney from Killamine. He was a member of the diarrhea company here in Borrisoleigh, and you can see there from that's an excerpt from his pension statement. And he was a carpenter. I think he had a brother Tommy who was a painter, if I'm not mistaken. I think I'm pretty right in that. So you can see what he was involved in. You see they're making pipes. So that was what really beat that much it wasn't. But however, got him going in it. And you can see, I often think when I read his pension statements relative to Borrisoleigh, I always feel sorry for Ross Cossage. I don't know how many times claim for ambushes at Ross Cottage. It must have been a terrible place. Well, of course, during the War of Independence, it was empty at the time. And Martin Burke, who came from there, was killed above in Glasnevin, and George Sweeney, Blacknetown, was actually killed there at the door of Ross Cottage. I've gone there some there. He gives his list of activities, and you see there, later, execution of spies, Maher and another. Now, I don't know who the other was, and I can't find anything. Much of the go to the records, I can't find anything, but I know who Paddy Maher was. Paddy Maher was from Mount Canaan. Paddy Maher was a veteran of the Boer War, not the First World War, the Boer War. And he was, I suppose he was basically accused of passing information to the authorities. And the reason for that was, he used to be drinking with him in the pubs. So, he was taken out, he was shot. Now, who knows the rights and wrongs of these things, but I do remember myself, the same as a young man like, my father, and my father was doing the post up around Glasnevin and Bernan and these places, and maybe with him on a Saturday, and I don't many times I heard it. I couldn't even name the people. They're long dead now. They heard saying it, and they used to say, "It was wrong what was done to that man. That man should never have been shot." But I suppose it shows the adaptability of the Irishman. It does, the shooting of Maher, and if you were to read the court of military inquiry to the killing of Maher, it makes a horrific reading, because he was really tortured before he was shot, and he was shot at close range. It doesn't make for pleasant reading. But the adaptability of the Irishman, 1924, Michael Droney was in the Guards, he was, so a case, I suppose, of poacher turned gamekeeper. A bit like Michael O'Callaghan in Manower, South Tipperary. He was involved in the killing of 2 policemen, very up close and personal in 1916. When he came back from America, he was a court clerk to Justice William O'Connell, so he could play under all kinds of conditions. John Lanigan, the MP for Cashel, I'm sure many of you here have walked the tower, and after there, sure, the sheep often went to stay up in the tower. So, Lanigan on the tower. So, to celebrate his victory in the 1859 election, he built the tower. Now, he done it on the tree, yellow clay and lime, and as soon as the weather, weather like this didn't have much sympathy on yellow clay and lime, and it was washed out, but it was. So, it was, what shall I say, they made an attempt then to paint it up with Portland cement, but it was January of 1895, it finally crumbled, and the edifice fell down to the bottom of the hill. The phrase Lanigan's folly found itself very much into colloquialism. When the local government board would be proposing to build cottages, of course, no farmer wanted to give a site for a cottage. So, when the council would meet, and they proposed we build a cottage wherever it would be, and the cry would go, "Oh yeah, another Lanigan's folly." That was only one instance, but in many instances that's that phrase was used. It was. For some reason, July 1859, it wasn't popular that day because the heather on the tower was set on fire. You can see where it's buried. Where it's buried in Glasnevin is a very prestigious spot. It's what's called the O'Connell Circle, and there's a group of vaults around the circle, and John Lanigan is buried in the middle of that. you see, the absentee MP, even though he was close enough from the area, you can see by the first one there that John Lanigan MP is shortly to visit his constituents. You know, they must have felt very grateful to us. His friends intended to give him a public entry, and for that purpose, preparations to form a procession to proceed from Borrisoleigh and escort him into the City of the Kings. Thus, the honourable gentleman intends to open the coming campaign, paying his personal respects to the electors. Like, he didn't really have lots of electors to pay his respects to, because in the constituency of Cashel, which would be termed a rotten borough, 140, just a little more than 140 people were entitled to vote. And you can see, when he lost the election in 1865, it was a most extraordinary result. When Lester O'Byrne won the seat. Now, how did that happen? At the convention in the City Hall in Cashel, Lanigan was proposed and he was seconded. O'Byrne was proposed and seconded. Now, when anybody went to speak, nobody could hear them, because, as the paper said at the time, the hall was thronged with the great unwashed. So the people had no say, or had no relatives whatever in the fair, took over the hall and just shouted everybody down. On, I suppose, a kind of a clapometer thing or whatever, or show of hands, Lanigan was declared the winner. But Burton objected, and it was taken then to a ballot. And as it happened then, Burton won by, I think, something like 80 votes against 46. Then it was one of the rotten boroughs, and it was disbanded in 1870. The election afterwards, how that came about, the election after the 67 election, the election afterwards, a man called Mr. Henry Munster contested that against O'Byrne, and he was a Tory, and even though he lost the election, he took the result to the court, and then it was considered that much wrongdoing and bribery and corruption was involved in it. They say that John Lanigan was the last MP to be elected honestly for the constituency of Cashel. He was he lived in Richmond House in Templemore. I'm not really sure which Richmond House. Sometimes I think it is where Sean Maher had a pub down the Templemore Road, and other times where Dr. Chadwick was in Richmond. Depends on you know different stories from newspapers indicate either places, and both of them were called Richmond House. So I'm not really sure which one or not. You know, he had a family, and to this day, his family reside in Mount Juliet in Kilkenny, and one of them was very much involved in some of these tribunals. You know, they're still lawyers and all of that. And I think I'm safe in saying that one of them represented Ireland in the Olympics as some minority sport, something like archery. I think it was archery, but certainly a minority sport. If any, how many here might have went to school to Dick Barra, Mr. Barra? Any remember, or I seem to recall, a story in a book about the land agent coming to the tenant's door, and he said to the young, he picked out the young lad, he said, "Tell me, my boy, when did you eat meat last?" And the young lad said, "We had a goose long ago when it was Christmas." And is this just a vision I had, or no? But Mr. Barron, you know, kind of, it was, I suppose, it was a great, you know, Mr. Barron was, I suppose, he kind of, you know, this was to stand against the landlord. It was, you know. Why do I say that? See, when we think of tenants, this is the connotation that comes up in our mind. Is the guy outside the cabin door, the bathroom lamp, and all these kind of things. Well, if you look at, we say, what were the tenants in John Lanigan's situation, you know. And if you read it there, the Turners meet in favour of tenants' rights, so Lanigan was campaigning for tenants' rights, and parliamentary reform came off on Monday last, notwithstanding that no effort was left untried to make it a great county demonstration. The whole thing proved a signal failure. Though O'Donoghue was from Glenfesca, Kerry, O'Donoghue the Glens. So if he was getting paid so much money to come to Tipperary, he'd have been doing quite well. But actually, the only time he set foot in Tipperary was at the election convention. O'Donoghue, with at least 10 other MPs, must have been there. But it was intended the proceedings should be concluded with a banquet. Though O'Donoghue, to be sure, was there, he should attend, being the mob member for the levy. He dare not be absent. But with the exception of Mr. Blake Waterford, MP for Waterford, his other expected compeers were not there, were absent. O'Donoghue treated the assemblage to a diatribe of great length and spoke the usual quantity of claptrap nonsense. But when the banquet was alluded to, his stomach actually nauseated at the idea of shutting himself up in a dining room with gathering his saw around him, under the pretence that he was so much affected by the recent death of a relative, he could only attend our meeting and spout any quantity of nonsense. But being unable to ease anything, he actually cut the concerns. A diligent search was made for John Lanigan, Esquire, the great Tipperary advocate of tenants' rights, and a Lanigan, which means exterminate your own tenants and then cry out for tenants' rights for your neighbours. But as it is said, he got a friendly hint in the early part of the day that some questions would be asked him as to how he got his own hands on nearly the whole of Glasnevin and what had become of the 50 or 60 families who occupied it when he got a lease from the late Oscar Cave. And as it might not be very convenient for him to give a satisfactory explanation, it was found that he too had followed the leader and bolted. Finally, about 60 or 70 sat down to dinner with Mr. Borrisoleigh in the chair. They did ample justice to the animals with the liquids, when the liquids were not neglected. So, you see, in the land ownership and tenants, and sometime in the future, I'll probably get an opportunity to talk about it. When Lord Portalis came to Borrisoleigh in the height of the famine, 1846, he came to Borrisoleigh, and he met his tenants in the Temperance Hall in Borrisoleigh, and they presented him with an address, and this was generally a big scroll of more or less telling him how adorable he was. Now, they said, those people who were capable of presenting that to Lord Portalis, they were actually landlords in their own right. So it was a pyramid with Portalis at the top, then these guys, and then further down along to the fellow who had 2 acres and set it out in 1/8 of an acre allotments. So when we talk about tenants' rights, it might be necessary the tenant that we would, the picture of the tenant that we would conjure up in our own minds. Was it Shelley? Was Ozymandias? You know, all that remains. We see the circle. I think the concrete thing there is something to do with the weather station. Somebody told me that one time, or is it just the mark that? I don't know. But we see the circle. That's all that remains of Lanigan's Tower. Now, Kennedy Bundle. Kennedy Bundle, days of Ormond style. But later still at a rather shady locality, Montgomery Street in Dublin. He had a pub at number 52 Montgomery Street. Now, I don't know. John Kennedy was from finding him up, which would be a little bit further back than Ormond Street. He was a dollar man, he was. So the temporary people are in the clear now. In 1889, he bought a quarter of Borrisoleigh, well, I said a half of Borrisoleigh, but that's a bit of an exaggeration, for £4,000. He bought that area from the Turles Road, the bridge down the Turles Road. Those fields, as you come up there, we say where the hurling field is now, all of that, where the Clothes of Bear stands, and up this street. And also, as you come in from Nina, we say from Centra down more or less to where Paddy Ma's pub was. And he had different little bits and pieces of land. Down the Turles Road, he had what would be known as the Pond Field. And he also had an area of land, that land was sold there lately, across from the Pond Field. So he had a nice little portfolio of land around Borrisoleigh. In that, there were quite a number of tenement houses. And when his agent was collecting the rent, that little note was found with the rent, and said, your change from public to landlord has not improved your politeness. So people aren't a bit shy about letting Kennedy Bundle know what they thought of him. He came in for pretty much bad press, you know, on the local papers. And one piece written in the Nina News, I think it was, about him, it said the little lord who sells all the porter, I wouldn't give a penny abatement to his poor tenants. And that went on, even though he himself has got a 40% rebate for the principal landlords, Clement Green of Capamora. So you see what's involved in that. John Kennedy was a landlord, but he was also a tenant to Clement Green of Capamora. So this is where, I suppose, the hierarchy of, if the guy lowest down didn't pay his way, everybody up along suffered. 1902 saw a huge land agitation here in Borrisoleigh, and most of that concerned was the break up of the remnants of the Cairn estate in Barnard. And there was pitched battles here in the streets in Borrisoleigh, high profile court cases. Sheedy from Limerick, the Skeffen connection. David Sheedy, I think, he was a powerful orator, and he went around, agitating for land reform and for the rights of small farmers. And he was arrested, and he was tried here in Borrisoleigh and later in Templemore. And there was a little poem written about it, a good size of a poem, you know. I have two verses included, but they're only more harmless ones. You see, 1905, 1902, 1903, we say a lot there. Barnard was finally broken up in 1908. You see, a transition in how people thought about land. Like 1902, like the famine was 50 years, still in living memory. And people saw land simply as a place where you grew food, you fed yourself, you guarded yourself from starvation, and you sowed something else that you could sell to pay the rent. And that's as simple as it was. At that time, a kind of a transition was coming about in the way people thought about things. And people, to basically what it was, if you had land, if you grazed cattle, sell the cattle, and then you could buy the potatoes. And it was that kind of a transformation where older thinking was meeting with newer ideas. And it was at that time the system, this 11 months grazing system, and this meant landowners very unpopular. So whoever it was put pen to paper, and the grazers were the people who rented this land, and they were very, very unpopular. The grazers, they could now make a wolf in the fold to help Kennedy Bundle to gather more gold. So Kennedy Bundle is now in sore grief, and let Michael Shea supply Thompson with beef. Thompson was Walter Thompson. He was the man who he was Cairns land steward over in Barnan. He was, and he was the man who took charge of Barnan when Cairn left. Kennedy Bundle was certainly in sore grief because he was getting very bad press, and he was getting a minuscule return on his £4,000 investment. When all this was going on, you see, he had other things in the fire he had, and other things were happening. You see, there was a transformation in agriculture, There was also, something happened in Dublin. The tram out to Holt, up to that, it was a steam tram. And if you went on a steam tram, your clothes got all dirty with the coal, the spuds from the coal. But now it was electrified. And people who owned the shops in the city centre, they lived over their shops. And then the fashionable then to leave your work at 6 o'clock in the evening, close your shop, and move out to suburbia. So this was another transformation that was taking place. And John Kennedy was one of the first to realise that this was happening. And he leased land of a Lord Vernon in Clontarf, and he built 39 houses. Like those houses today are changing hands at, well, you know, you're talking about well over $1 million, like, you know, but probably more. Like, I think that house there had something like $2.25 million, and that was a few years ago. So, you know, the lady done from Clontarf and some of the Historical Society, and they did a study on that, and I got in touch with them to know, like, did they know anything about John Kennedy, and they were not in the slightest bit aware of his presence here in Borrisoleigh and what he owned, you know. His bits of land were sold off bit by bit, and he died in 1933, and he buried in Glasnevin. To some of these, some of these websites, the family trees on them, and I was just looking through it and to see could I find anything, and I actually found a great grandson of his, John Mahon, living in London, and he was meant to know a bit about John Kennedy, so I gave him the edited highlights, and he got back to me, and he said he'd be over in the spring, so if any of you scored to settle with Kennedy Bundle. The last verse of it, long life to those heroes who acted so true. You know, the names are still there, young Carroll and Morris and Burke and Kyle Crew, and all the true-hearted who were never afraid to fight the big bully in Bundle's brigade. There's plenty of verses in between, but I won't put them up. But the reverse is justified, you know. Like, why did he pay £4,000 for a half of Borrisoleigh, as I said? I suppose one of the reasons he paid £4,000 is because there was somebody else willing to pay $3,950, you know. So what I'm saying is that if something was for sale, he would, I suppose, have felt he had as much right to buy it as anybody else to do what he wanted with it. But there's just something that maybe shows me to thinking, you know. Was during the First World War, Tom Burke, the schoolmaster, he wrote regular letters to his brother Michael in America. And in 1918 he wrote one about the threat of conscription, he did. And you know, that had the people very much emanated at the time. And what Tom Burke wrote was, if the government only gave us a chance of a bit of land, say a rood for each household, it would do far more for them than all they will gain by conscription. I know that if they conscripted us to till Bundle's property, I would be the first man to toe the line and do my bit with the sports. It's a damn shame to see whole fields of grasslands in the hands of one man and scores of people here without what would feed a lark. So, you know, again, kind of the conflict of thought, you know, and you know, the people who rented the land to graze the cattle looked at one particular way. you know, householders and, you know, people who lived in the towns, and people without property looked at another way. There's not much when you go to Irish history, local or national, that you won't trace back to an issue or issues of land. Martin Burke was born in Springfield. If any of you know where Ryan Tom the Hooper lived, that's where Martin Burke was born. In 1828, his brother Milo was murdered there. And Milo Burke had a nephew. He lived in Liscahill House. And he was very vocal in the campaign against Daniel O'Connell. There was a bill introduced in the Parliament in England that would disallow citizens from carrying firearms. And O'Connell was very much against this, he was. You know, strange enough for a pacifist, but he said that people would have a right to defend themselves. But Milo Burke's nephew, Patrick Burke Ryan, was very much for this, he was, because, and he said, my own uncle was murdered. He said, for one reason only. He said, because he was the last of leases in land were given out for lifetimes, and Milo Burke was the last. So when Milo Burke was killed, the ownership of the land then was in disarray again. It was in dispute. It was. And he wrote as well that when Martin Burke and the Shelburne came down from Dublin to collect the rent, he was promptly chased out of the place, and it didn't get too far with that. It didn't. He bought where the Shelburne stands today in 1824, 150-year lease for £3,000. Massive money at the time. And he built there a luxury hotel. The novelist Thackeray, he wrote eloquently about it. It was the best he had met in his travels. You see at the left there, Springfield House. Springfield House, he named it after his house in Springfield. Sea Pint House was a country hotel with 22 acres, and he sold Sea Pint House when he bought the site for the Shelburne and built on top of it. He was on the board of the Commercial Agricultural Bank, and that'll be relevant in a second. And for some time he was a member of Dublin City Council. But see, Springfield House had a passage down to the sea. They wanted their own bit of coastline. Now, when the train the railway was being done from Amen Street to Kingstown, now it was going across this ground. It was so the property lost value straight away. And actually what they done was, and they're there to this day, they built private bridges for people to go from their houses down to the sea. So those are still there. Now, I just move on a bit, but it was on the board of the Commercial and Agricultural Bank. Now, a high-profile court case. In 1837, he wrote a letter to some of a Dublin paper, something Sentinel, I can't recall the name of the paper. And in it, he lambasted a man called Pierce Mahoney. And Mahoney was two things. He was a member of the board of the Bank of Ireland, and he was also a member of the board of the railway company, who was doing this railway from Amen Street to Kingstown. So they had plenty of differences. They had plenty of different outlooks on things, certainly. Burke and Mahoney, they met in Stephen's College Green in Dublin, and Mahoney gave Burke a couple of boxes into the jaw. So that led to this court case. So the court case, it was held before the Court of Common Pleas in Dublin in 1837. Now, the man on the left there like he died in 1937, he did. So that's, I'll just give you a story about that in a second. He went and he testified on Burke's behalf. Now, he was a Dr. Edward Kelly, and he's buried above in Glenkeen, the side Iron Railing. So, what would have brought him up there to do that? He wasn't the chief medical witness. He was just. What he testified was, I saw Martin Burke today. One day he was okay. The next day I saw it, there was marks and bruises, and he showed all the signs had been beaten up. So he was. The reason he went for Burke was and Elizabeth Fogarty. They lived in the Ivy House, and Fogarty's mother was Burke. So I would take it that Fogarty and Martin Burke were Dr. Kelly's wife and Martin Burke and Shelburne were first cousins. There would be few enough other reasons for him to go from Borrisoleigh. Now, how did they get that photograph? A man came in one day, like they often or sometimes do to me, tracing a family of trees, and I saw that he had that picture, and that was a portrait that was presented to that man's granddaughter when she got married in America. So he gave me that, he did. Now, it was an open short case, it was. Mahoney assaulted Burke. There were witnesses. So there was nothing then to do only to discredit the witnesses and to reduce the whole thing into a comedy. And a man called Holmes cross-examined Dr. Kelly. And he said, the first thing he asked him, he said, did you order leeches? And at that time, people, you know, the medical thinking was that all disorders, they emanated from the blood. And if the blood was soaked from the body, or a sufficient quantity to renew itself, and you'll be well again. So, in answer to that, Dr. Kelly said, he said, I can't remember. And then Holmes said, what else did you prescribe that you can't remember? You know, and then he said, are you the Dr. Kelly said that swore in evidence that a man's head was not part of his body? And Kelly said, I never did such a thing. He said, are you not from the Devil's Bait? No, he said, that's not the Dr. Kelly. So the whole thing, and the reason for that was to reduce the damages. You know, as if it were the door leave the court here, fellow, well met. But Martin Burke collected £450 for his troubles, which would be a kind of sizable sum enough. Now, an ornamental profession. This will maybe kind of diverge a little bit. And his grave in Glenkeen, the slab in his grave, said, erected by Mrs. Lizzie F. Kelly, to the memory of her husband, Dr. Edward Kelly, late of Borrisoleigh, who departed this life on the 16th day of July, 1837, in the 34th year of his age. Sincerely and deservedly regretted. He was an ornament of his profession, an affectionate husband, an attached friend, and blessed with all those amiable qualities that embellish society. His sorrowing widow and children will ever mourn his loss, also his infant son. So, needless to say, it was thought well of that day it was. A yet more famous trial. Charles Gavin Duffy was arrested on account of, again, like Richard Dalton Williams, for articles that the editorials that he wrote in the Nation newspaper. And he was tried for treason, he was. And the penalty for treason, you know, was death, it was. Now, the first trial of Gavin Duffy was aborted, it was, for some reason. And in the meantime, before the second one took place, there was a huge outcry that the jury consisted exclusively of Orange men. And Martin Burke was invited onto the jury for the second trial of Gavin Duffy. And the reason he was invited on, because being a businessman, he was what they considered a safe Catholic, that he wouldn't rock the boat. Isaac Butt was the man who defended Gavin Duffy. And Butt objected to the inclusion of Martin Burke in the jury. But before the trial began, Burke's wife went to Gavin Duffy's wife, and she said to Gavin Duffy's wife, she said, "Allow my husband," she says, "to be on that jury," she said, "we will see he's acquitted." And apparently Gavin Duffy's wife said, "How will you do that?" And she said, "Myself and my daughter will sit every day facing the jury, and if your husband is convicted, my husband did not come home." So he was duly acquitted. He was the only dissenting voice in the jury, he was. And Gavin Duffy was acquitted. It was, you know, when you see the inscription in his headstone, it doesn't say "Generous enough headstone, befitting the man who founded the Shelburne." A good Christian, an honest patriot, and an independent juryman, and a true-hearted Irishman. He incurred the wrath of the British establishment, and I don't know who was it in the House of Lords, whatever they said about him anyway, but Burke said if they ever came face to face, he'd horsewhip him. The death of Martin Burke. Yesterday, at his residence, after prolonged illness, died Martin Burke Esquire, proprietor of the Shelburne Hotel, and well known to his countrymen for his sterling patriotism and integrity, exhibited as a very important crisis in our country's history. To his firmness and purity in the jury box, it is owed that Charles Gavin Duffy is not now in confinement or on parole in a penal settlement, instead of being in the position of a ruler of an important colony and a future empire. He was governor of New South Wales, I think. His spiritual reply to the English minister, who dared to impeach his motives on that occasion, and in which he threatened his accuser with a horsewhip, is well remembered in this country. The deceased was possessed of many estimable qualities, which made for him a wide circle of friends, and his remains were interred in Glasnevin. Just to go back there, his brother Myra was murdered in 1828. His brother Andrew was murdered in Cooley in 1839. He lived in a place called Greenlawn in Limerick. I take that's the name of a private house. And he came to Cooley and he stayed overnight with a man called John Shouldice. And I think where Shouldice lived would be where that area where Ryan Pierce's or Jack Young lived down in Cooley there, or Glentaya that would be. And he stayed there the night, and what he was doing the day after, he was going down to lay out a road to the bog in Garryglass, and he was set upon by a number of men. He was killed in the side of the road. He wasn't killed. He was so badly beaten. He was taken into Quinlan's in Cooley, and he died a number of days after. A number of people were brought to trial. One was a man called Gleason, and another was a fellow called Phil Hayes. And Gleason was acquitted, and Phil Hayes was convicted and sentenced to death. And when he was sentenced to death, Hayes said to the judge, he said, I have nothing to do with it. He said, I'm as innocent as my parish priest. He said, I beseech you, he says, for the long day. That execution would be pushed out to the limit. When I was looking at this, I could find no reference for poor Phil Hayes, I couldn't. Only a while after, maybe 4 years after, there was another trial in Lena. It was an assault involving a seizure of cattle. And Phil Hayes turned up again, he did. This time, a bit like I said about Michael Droney, the adaptability of the Irishman. Now he was on the Crowbar Brigade, and he was with the sheriffs and seizing some poor farmer's cattle. And the judge was kind of scratching his head about this. He said, is this the fellow that was sentenced to death a few years ago? And his solicitor said, he said he was, but he said he was reprieved because he was innocent. And now he works for a nephew of the man who was murdered. So the complexities of it. Sergeant Paddy Doyle. The map is maybe a bit difficult to see there. The map is a map of Castle Quarter, and if you see where the yellow map is up there, that would be the field there where the coursing used to be held there a number of years ago. If you see a cluster of houses there, that would be Sears's. Young Burke has his sports thing down there. Go up the lane there, and that's where Paddy Dunn came up. Often have my own father talk about Jack Dunn of Brown. No, that's not Brown, that would be actually Castleport. Paddy Dunn in the 1911 census is a groom in Fort William. That was in April. In February that year he was married. He was married to Nora Dwyer in Knockavilla, and his occupation is down as a horse trainer. He joined the police army in 1922. He was 44 years of age when he joined the army, so he was no youngster, he wasn't. And within a short space of time, he was transferred to the equestrian school in McKee Barracks. Now, the man was gifted with horses, he was, apparently, and there's stories of him, one time they're bringing horses to America, to a show in America, and the whole of the ship got flooded, and Dunn went down, and and he done everything to rescue the horses. Much peril to his own life. The Irish team were exclusively represented by the army, and in 1934 they went to the show in Rome, and they were jumping against the Dutch team, and the Dutch team was under the auspices of the Dutch royal family, Queen Wilhelmina, and one of their horses developed some problem, and Queen Wilhelmina, she went to Gerald O'Dwyer, the Major Gerald O'Dwyer, to ask, was there any chance he would allow Paddy Dunn to look at the horse? That's how well he was known. She knew about him, she did. And everybody in the horse business and church of this knew about Paddy Dunn. And Gerald O'Dwyer said there's no problem. And Paddy Dunn went anyway, he done whatever he had to do with the horse. The horse jumped the day after, and there was no problem. That evening, Queen Wilhelmina, she came to the hotel where the Irish contingent was staying to treat them all to a drink. And of course, it was fine wine and port and brandy and all of that. And then Paddy Dunn went, Sergeant Dunn, what are you having? He said, I have a bottle of Guinness. And when it was all done, then the bartender said, and Your Highness, what will you be having? She said, I will have the same as Sergeant Dunn. She says, to be a pleasure to have whatever Sergeant Dunn is having. And she drank the bottle of Guinness. He was given one of the greatest honours of all in military history. His superiors carried him from Auckland Street Church to Glasnevin Cemetery. And you see the four men there, Gerald O'Dwyer, Freddie Heron, Tom Finlay, Dan Corrie. These would be the Christy Rings, as it were, of show jumping. Today, like they're still spoken about in those circles there. And they lowered him into the grave. And when Gerald O'Dwyer wrote his memoirs, it's a lovely, concise book of his time with Irish show jumpers. He dedicates it to Sergeant Paddy Dunn. And this is what he wrote: dedicated to memory of Sergeant Patrick Dunn. Unheralded and quietly spoken, but with great knowledge of horses, so much was owing. He was highly respected in his field. And you see today his stone in Glasnevin. He had a brother. There's often heard people talk about Jack Dunn of Brown. And Jack Dunn died in 1942 in the Fever Hospital in Roscrea. I don't know if anybody local now related to him. Paddy Kennedy Mares, Bannahow. He joined. I suppose, like many, he went to Dublin to work perhaps in the grocery trade. I don't know. He joined the Citizen Army. You don't really let's go to Dublin to join the volunteers or whatever, but he joined the Citizen Army. And after the Citizen Army, he went to the volunteers. And you can see from the the references there, like the military archives, you know what his role was. He joined the volunteers, and he was a member of Michael Collins' squad. And when on Bloody Sunday, he was one of 3 men who went to the Gresham Hotel to take out, it was purportedly three spies in the Gresham Hotel, and he was involved in that. He was. Paddy Moore was the man in charge of that. Moore was actually executed after he was. Paddy Moore would won it forgotten 10. He would. In the treaty negotiations, he was a courier to bring the message, bring news and messages from the negotiations back to Dublin, and he was involved in the killing of Shanker's Ryan in Gloucester Street, Montgomery Street. Just tell you about that in a second now. And these are just little pieces about him. And his role in Bloody Sunday said, on the Sunday before Bloody Sunday, I was instructed to report to 100 civilian place that night, where I was told I would receive specific instructions regarding an operation to be carried out the following morning. When I arrived at civilian place that night, I discovered that a number of specifically selected men from my company were present, and that Paddy Moore, my company officer commander, was in charge of them. Sean Russell took charge for that night, and he gave his instructions for the following morning. He explained that a big swoop was to be made simultaneously on all British agents residing in private houses throughout the city, and that the operation would be carried out at 9 o'clock sharp. He detailed Paddy Moore to take his party to the Gresham Hotel and eliminate 3 British intelligence officers who were stopping there. Lieutenant Colonel Wilde and Captain McCormick were 2 of the agents. He said, I cannot remember the name of the third. I arranged with Paddy Moore to meet him in North Earl Street. I met him as arranged, and we proceeded to the Gresham. As we entered the hotel, the other member of our party who were in the vicinity came in after us. Our first job was to disconnect the telephone. As we knew the rooms in which the intelligence agents were located, our party split up, as pre-arranged, and proceeded to the rooms allotted to them by Paddy Moore. There were people in the dining room, and we took up positions at the door and held them there. 2 British agents were eliminated that morning, and a third escaped. He was a Catholic, I believe, and had gone out to early mass. The whole operation lasted less than 10 minutes. So, you know, pretty gruesome stuff in that, you know. The killing of John Ryan followed quickly after that. Just reading that, a man named John Ryan was residing in the vicinity of Gloucester Street, was a military policeman in Dublin Castle, and also, I believe, at one time employed as a mascot to a British military officer in the castle, under whom he served in the British Army in India. Information reached our intelligence that Ryan was spying on wanted men at night time. Curfew made no difference as far as he was concerned. He could be out at any time during the night. It was established that he was the man who tracked Dick McKee to the house in Gloucester Street, and he chalked by arrangement the door of the house in which McKee was stopping on the night he was arrested there. You remember McKee was taken along with Conor Clune and Paddock Clancy, and they were murdered in Dublin Castle. The idea of the chalk mark was to guide the auxiliaries to the house in question. A couple of months after the murder of Dick McKee, instructions were given by the Director of Intelligence that the informer John Ryan was to be shot. This order was duly carried out. We knew that Ryan frequented a public house adjacent to where he resided on a morning in February 1921. I took 2 squad men there, Bill Stapleton and Jimmy Conroy. 2 of us entered the house in question and shot him. The third man remained outside. So, you know, a case of, you know, killing up close and personal. He returned to Tipperary, not without a little detour. He was associated for a while with the notorious Oriel House, which would have been the CIA of the New Free State. Dan Green gave a reference for him in his pension. He came back to Tipperary and he served for a while in the mid-Tipperary Brigade, and then he had a falling out with them and the falling out was on the killing of a John Bergen in Clonmore. And Bergen was he was involved in a bank robbery in Bore, and much of this went on. You know, lads robbed banks for the cause, and they robbed banks for their own cause, and all of this. And so it was a bit of a grey area there, but it was unusual to see as if a Republican being killed by their own. And when this happened, Paddy Kennedy had enough of it, and he gave up on it, and he took no further part in it. He went back to Dublin, lived on a number of addresses. He died in McAir Avenue in Dublin, and he died as a rake collector. Now, just to add a little bit more to that, you know, in common with many of the squad, there's a great untold story with many members of the squad, and many of the participants of this troubled time. Like, you know, those two excerpts that I read there, that you can see in the board, you know, these are pretty horrific things to deal with. Now, today, maybe there'll be some degree of comfort or counsel or whatever to help people in these things, but back then there wasn't. And this is something I have found that permeates right down through the War of Independence and all of this, and especially with members of Collins's squad. Many went on to live what you could most charitably describe as dysfunctional lives. You know, and it's not without reason. And I give an example of one man, Charlie Dalton, Emma Dalton's brother. Charlie Dalton spent most of his life after that in and out of Grange Garden Mental Hospital. And at night when he would go to sleep, he would picture a young boy at the end of his bed, and the young boy saying to him, "Please don't shoot my daddy." And then he'd wake up. And this troubled him all his life. And that was the heavy price that these guys paid for these things. So it's not without, you know, there's a downside to all of this, you know. So now, that's my t-shirt finished for tonight, so now I need to get to learning, but I didn't make up any of this. I got quite a bit from the newspaper archives. My go-to resource. Amazing what's in those archives, you know, what's there in front of you. The Gleason papers in UCD and the genealogy records. The Glasnevin Trust. You know, if you ever go to Glasnevin, you know, go in there into their office, and they're so helpful. Caitlin is from Nina. She's, if any remember Paddy Gleason that lectured here one time, she's taken over from Paddy. Tom Toomey, Tom is a good friend of mine. Tom wrote the memoirs of General the Wire, and he has some interesting stuff to you know, like he wrote. Tom Toomey wrote this, like, but when I talk to Tom, he tells me far more like he does, you know, and about Paddy, you know, than what appears in the book, you know. The Dunleary Ratdown Heritage Society, they gave me a bit of information on Martin Burke. And Eddie Stapleton and Martin Connors there, when we're going around Glasnevin and faded headstones and no reading glasses and frustration and all that goes with it. All these fellas, we found, we were like Bono on YouTube, we found what we were looking for. And a little piece of just the newspaper archives. Somebody said about me, Michael said that about writing, you know, and I have plenty of faults and failings, but one thing I will do when I'm writing, I will never use a small word if two big ones will do instead. I love this kind of thing. I said that Finn also had Tracy summoned for assault. Joseph admitted that she gave a separate provocation for the assault, that she's languishing not of the principles laid out by Chesterfield. I think Chesterfield compiled a dictionary. Instead of availing him of the invitation to a dorsal dialogue. What's a dorsal dialogue? I think to the fancy name for talking to the rocks. Gave Joseph a stash on the smellers. Drawn the claret plentiful. The whole tree got about him and knocked him down twice, and he had, in self-defence, to make a kick and fail. The whole matter arose out of a decree which he had obtained against him. When he was sprawling on the ground, they threw the money at him and decamped with the decree. Mr. Castle said the only question was if the defendant did more than they were justified in doing for the unmannerly answer he gave. The cross case being covered, Finn swore Mr. Tracy struck the first blow by giving him a kick in the abdominal region. We doubled him up like a pancake. So, thanks for your attention.
I just want to say a big word of thanks to John for a fantastic, fascinating lecture. And it's obvious from the lecture the colossal amount of research and homework that has gone into it. And the proof of the pudding is an audience like yourselves. You'll hear a pin fall for the last hour and a half. So John, thank you very, very much. And as I said to you before, we're having another lecture around the middle of December. And this will be given by our friend Sean Hogan. It's about Alderman Joseph MacDonald TD. So something to watch out for in the next few weeks. We'll now have a cup of tea.